There's a delicate art to destroying someone without leaving fingerprints. I know because I watched them practice it on me for 3 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The careful architecture of exclusion. The strategic emails sent at 11:58 p.m. The way Claire would touch her pearl necklace twice whenever she was about to suggest one of my ideas as her own. These are the details you catalog when you're being erased. These are the whispers you collect when they think you're already gone. I still remember the mahogany conference table, immaculate and gleaming. 18 seats, but only 17 people. The empty chair wasn't an oversight. It was a message. My name had been on the meeting invitation. My presentation was the 3rd agenda item. Yet somehow, no one thought to wait, to call, to send a quick message asking where I was. Because they knew. They all knew. That's when I understood the precision of their campaign. Not a single person glanced at that empty chair with concern. They had been conditioned, carefully, meticulously, to see my absence as natural, expected, correct. The first cut is always disguised as a compliment. We need you focusing on the foundation work, Sarah. You're so thorough, so detail-oriented. Daniel's smile never reached his eyes as he reassigned my client portfolio, the one I'd built from nothing over 18 months. His hand on my shoulder, paternal and patronizing. This is actually a vote of confidence. The fluorescent lights hummed above us, witnesses to the first incision. I nodded and thanked him because that's what well-trained professionals do. But inside, something shifted. A tectonic plate moving just millimeters, but changing everything beneath the surface. Most people think revenge burns hot, all fury and flames. They're wrong. Real revenge is a cold, patient thing. It calculates. It documents. It waits for the precise moment when justice and opportunity align. I learned this watching them dismantle my credibility meeting by meeting, email by email, whisper by whisper. The same methods they used to break me would become the blueprint for their undoing. The irony wasn't lost on me, even then. Claire became director of strategy 8 months after I joined Meridian Consulting. Her predecessor had described me as the best hire we've made in 5 years during my performance review. 2 weeks after taking over, she began referring to my market analysis as preliminary findings in executive meetings. By month 3, she was assigning junior analysts to expand and refine my work before presentation. By month 6, my name had disappeared from the reports entirely. I just think we should present a unified front to leadership, she explained, green eyes wide, with practiced sincerity, her voice soft as a confession. It creates less confusion about who's accountable. The conference room was empty except for us, but she still spoke quietly, as if sharing wisdom too valuable for others to overhear. It's actually protecting you, in a way. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the table between us. I nodded and made notes while something inside me turned to stone. People reveal themselves in the smallest moments. Daniel checking his watch whenever I spoke in meetings, but leaning forward attentively when others made identical points. Claire touching the back of my arm while subtly steering me away from conversations with board members at company functions. Michael from finance consistently forgetting to copy me on critical budget emails, then apologizing profusely about technological glitches that seemed to affect only communications meant for me. Each incident so minor, so deniable. Each one another drop of water on the stone. The night I found myself locked out of the client database was the night everything crystallized. I'd stayed late, working on quarterly projections that Claire had requested urgently for a morning meeting. At 10:17 p.m., my access disappeared mid-analysis. System error, the screen claimed. I called IT, where a confused technician informed me that my permissions had been changed that afternoon. Request. Came from director level, he said, stifling a yawn. Nothing I can do without authorization. I sat in the empty office, the blue light of my screen the only illumination, and felt something close to peace wash over me. The pretense had finally been abandoned. This wasn't incompetence or oversight. This was strategy. I wasn't imagining the slight tremor in Claire's voice when she claimed surprise the next morning. Technology, right? Always failing at the worst moment. She laughed, touching her pearls once, twice. Good thing we can push the client meeting to next week. Use the extra time to really polish those numbers. That evening, I began keeping the journal. Nothing dramatic, a simple document recording facts, times, participants, and outcomes. No emotions, no accusations, just data. The kind of document a detail-oriented person would create. The kind they had relegated me to producing while they took the spotlight. I noted the meeting where Michael presented my risk assessment framework as a finance team innovation. I recorded the exact minutes Daniel spent reviewing other team members' work versus mine. I documented every instance where my name disappeared. From project materials, every meeting invitation that arrived too late, every conversation that ended abruptly when I approached. The precision of their campaign was almost admirable. They never criticized my work directly. That would leave evidence, create a record. Instead, they questioned its relevance, its timing, its scope. This is solid foundational work, Sarah. Now we need someone to elevate it. Always that same theme. I was laying groundwork for others to build upon. Essential, but invisible. Valued, but replaceable. Present, but not quite necessary. April 12th was when Claire first mentioned team restructuring in our one-on-one. Her office smelled of expensive perfume and fresh flowers, a stark contrast to the sterile cubicles where the rest of us worked. Nothing definite yet, she assured me, voice honey smooth. But as we evolve, we need to ensure everyone's in the buy. Right seat. She tilted her head slightly, a practiced gesture of concern. I've noticed you seem less engaged recently. The accusation wrapped in solicitude. Classic Claire. What she couldn't see, what none of them could see, was how their systematic dismantling had given me a unique vantage point. When you're pushed to the periphery, you notice things those in the center miss. I saw how Daniel undermined Jason from business development with the same techniques he'd used on me 6 months earlier. I watched Claire take credit for Melissa's client retention strategy, while simultaneously questioning her commitment. I observed Michael's selective financial transparency creating friction between departments that should have been allies. Most importantly, I noticed the patterns in their destruction, the rhythms and routines of their quiet sabotage. They always isolated before striking. They created information asymmetry as a weapon. They used the language of support to disguise their undermining, and they never, ever left clear evidence of their intentions. So I became a ghost in the office, present but unseen. I arrived early. I stayed late. I volunteered for the unglamorous projects no one wanted. I became the repository of institutional knowledge that never quite made it into the official documentation. I made myself useful in ways that wouldn't threaten them, while watching them repeat their patterns with others. All while my journal grew, page by digital page. The annual client conference in Chicago was where I first saw the hairline fractures in their alliance. Claire interrupted Daniel twice during his keynote, adding critical context that subtly repositioned his points as derivative of her strategic vision. Daniel responded by mentioning, accidentally of course, that certain client deliverables had been delayed at the director level. Michael presented budget projections that contained conveniently different figures from what he'd provided to Claire the previous week. Tiny moments of discord, invisible to anyone not watching for them. I made notes in my hotel room that night, connecting these new data points with older patterns. "You're always so calm," Melissa told me at the airport, as we waited for our delayed flight. Dark circles shadowed her eyes. 3 months as Claire's latest protege had taken its toll. How do you do it? The question wasn't casual. It was a drowning person asking about flotation techniques. I smiled and shared some platitude about perspective, but what I wanted to say was, I'm calm because I'm no longer fighting the current. I'm calm because I'm playing a different game entirely. I'm calm because I've learned that patience is both a shield and a weapon. Summer brought the strategic planning retreat. 30 executives and senior managers sequestered at a lakeside, lodge for 3 days of alignment and vision setting. My invitation arrived suspiciously late. Another system glitch, Claire explained, leaving me with no time to prepare materials. I packed quickly, bringing only essentials and my continuously growing documentation of their methodology. The retreat revealed fissures I'd only glimpsed before. In breakout sessions, I watched Claire consistently undermine Daniel's authority while framing her interventions as supportive. I observed Michael withholding critical financial context that would have strengthened Daniel's position on market expansion. I noted how information flowed, or didn't, between their respective teams, creating confusion they could exploit. Most tellingly, I saw how board members were being fed carefully curated narratives that none of them received in full. It was during the final dinner that I first spoke to Thomas Hargrove, the newly appointed board member with a reputation for turning around toxic corporate cultures. He found me on the terrace, away from the forced conviviality inside. "Not one for crowds?" he asked, joining me at the stone balustrade overlooking the darkened lake. "I prefer observation to participation sometimes," I replied, which made him laugh, a genuine sound in a weekend of performative chuckles. "Honest answer, refreshing?" He studied me with shrewd eyes. "You're Sarah Chen, correct? I've read some of your market analyses. Impressive depth." I managed to hide my surprise. My work hadn't been circulated under my name in over a year. "Thank you. Though most of that serves as background material now." "Background material often tells the most interesting stories." He swirled amber liquid in his glass. "In my experience, organizational health is inversely proportional to how many layers separate insight from attribution." We spoke for 27 minutes. I chose my words carefully, sharing observations without accusations, patterns without blame. I asked questions about his previous experience with knowledge management during leadership transitions, a deliberately ambiguous phrase that he seemed to understand perfectly. As we parted, he handed me his card. "If you ever want to discuss those patterns in more detail, my door is open." 3 weeks later, the board announced a comprehensive cultural audit. Claire's smile froze when Thomas was introduced as the executive sponsor. Daniel developed a nervous habit of checking his email during conversations. Michael began holding unprecedented transparency sessions with the finance team. They sensed the shift, but couldn't locate its source. The predators suddenly uncertain whether they had become prey. I continued my documentation, now including their responses to the scrutiny. Claire began copying me on emails she had accidentally excluded me from for months. Daniel started mentioning my contributions in meetings, though the acknowledgments felt hollow and performative. Michael discovered urgent reasons why I should be included in financial planning discussions. Their sudden inclusion was as strategic as their previous exclusion had been. Too late, they realized the quiet person taking notes might actually be recording something consequential. The cultural audit team requested one-on-one interviews with all senior staff. My appointment was scheduled for October 17th, a rainy Tuesday that matched the mood in our increasingly tense offices. The interviewer, a serious woman named Eleanor with decades of HR investigation experience, began with standard questions about processes and communication. 30 minutes in, she set aside her prepared materials. "Ms. Chen, your colleagues have described you as detail-oriented and thorough repeatedly in our conversations." Her tone was neutral, professional. "Would you say that's accurate?" "Yes," I replied simply. And would you say you apply that same thoroughness to documenting your professional experiences? Our eyes met in a moment of perfect understanding. I believe in maintaining comprehensive records, I said carefully. For continuity purposes. She nodded once. I'd be very interested in reviewing any records you've maintained. For continuity purposes, of course. That evening, I sent her a secure link to my journal, now over 200 pages of meticulously documented incidents, patterns, communications, and outcomes. No accusations, no emotions, just facts, dates, participants, and results. The architecture of my erasure rendered in irrefutable detail. What followed wasn't dramatic. There were no shouting matches in hallways, no public terminations. The organization that had perfected the art of quiet destruction responded with equally quiet damage control. Meetings were called. Legal was consulted. HR became unusually present on our floor. Claire took an unexpected personal leave. Daniel became intensely interested in team rebuilding initiatives. Michael discovered urgent business that required extensive travel. The board called me to a private meeting on November 3rd. Thomas Hargrove was there, along with the CEO and chief counsel. On the polished table between us sat a printed copy of my documentation, now annotated with their own findings. The CEO looked older than she had at the retreat, the lines around her eyes deeper. "We've reviewed your continuity records," she said, each word precisely chosen. "Along with additional information gathered during the audit." I waited, hands folded calmly on the table. Silence is its own form of power. "The patterns you've documented align with concerns raised by others, though no one else was quite as thorough." Thomas's voice held something like respect. "We're addressing these systematic issues immediately." What they offered wasn't revenge. It was restoration. Claire would not be returning from her personal leave. Daniel was being transferred to the Singapore office, effectively removing him from headquarters politics. Michael would remain, but under structured oversight. And I was being offered a newly created position reporting directly to the executive team, focused on organizational integrity and knowledge management. "Your ability to observe patterns without being consumed by them is rare," the CEO told me as we concluded. "That perspective is valuable to us now." I accepted their offer not with triumph, but with the same quiet dignity with which I had endured. Revenge wasn't the point. It never had been. Justice was. Correction was. The acknowledgement that systems of destruction, no matter how subtle, eventually destroy themselves when exposed to light. In the weeks that followed, I watched the organization begin its halting recovery. Melissa thrived once freed from Claire's manipulative mentorship. Projects moved forward with clear attribution and accountability. Junior staff spoke more freely, in meetings. The culture didn't transform overnight. Toxicity leaves residue that takes time to clean, but the air felt clearer, the conversations more genuine. Claire sent me an email exactly once after her departure. No text, just an attachment, a Harvard Business Review article about resilience in professional settings. I never responded. Some conversations are finished before they begin. My new office has windows facing east. I watch the sunrise some mornings, thinking about the nature of power and patience. About how those who seek to diminish others ultimately diminish themselves. About how the most effective resistance sometimes looks like quiet observation. The mahogany conference table is still there in the main boardroom, still gleaming under fluorescent lights. But now, there are no empty chairs. During meetings, no one is being quietly erased. People ask if I feel vindicated, if the comeuppance of those who tried to destroy me brought satisfaction. The truth is both simpler and more complex than they expect. What I feel is restoration, not just of position or reputation, but of balance. Systems seek equilibrium eventually. Sometimes they just need someone patient enough to document the imbalance until it becomes impossible to ignore. I keep my journal still, though its purpose has evolved. Now it documents the rebuilding, the small victories, course corrections, and occasional backsliding that come with cultural transformation. Old habits resurface sometimes. New players occasionally attempt old games. But patterns, once visible, are harder to maintain. Daniel emails occasionally from Singapore, his messages carefully professional with undercurrents of unspoken regret. I respond with equal professionalism and no regret whatsoever. Michael treats me with the wary respect. One gives a dormant volcano, polite, distant, clearly hoping I contain no further eruptions. The board watches all of us, their attention no longer diverted by selective information flows. Thomas Hargrove visits quarterly for governance reviews. During his last trip, he joined me for coffee in the atrium. "You know what impressed me most about your documentation?" he asked, stirring his espresso thoughtfully. "You never once ascribed malice or intent. You simply recorded actions and impacts." "Intent is impossible to prove?" I replied. "Patterns speak for themselves." He nodded, studying me with that same shrewdness I'd noticed at the retreat. "Most people in your position would have sought more visible justice." "Visible justice is often mistaken for revenge," I said. "And revenge consumes the avenger." The winter sun slanted through the glass ceiling above us, casting geometric shadows across our table. Outside, the city continued its relentless pace. People moving in their own patterns, telling their own stories, fighting their own quiet battles for dignity and recognition. "What they did was take pieces of me," I continued after a moment. "My work, my voice, my place at the table. Taking pieces of them in return wouldn't restore what was lost. Only rebuilding the system could do that." Later that evening, alone in my office with the city lights glimmering beyond my window, I opened my journal and made the day's entry. No triumph, no drama. Just the clear-eyed documentation of another day in a healthier system. The simple record of being present, being seen, being heard. The quiet victory of existing fully in rooms where once I was being erased. There's a delicate art to rebuilding what others tried to destroy. It requires the same attention to detail, the same patience, the same careful observation that got you through the destruction. Some days I still catch myself checking for signs of exclusion, bracing for the subtle undermining that became so familiar. Old survival instincts don't fade quickly, but each day they're replaced, incrementally, with something steadier. Something that doesn't require hypervigilance to maintain. People who haven't experienced systematic erasure often misunderstand the nature of recovery. They expect grand gestures, emotional confrontations, public vindication. What actually heals are the mundane moments of proper functioning. Having your email included without having to ask. Receiving credit for your work without having to fight for it. Speaking in meetings without watching your idea travel around the table until someone else presents it as new. The absence of injury can be more powerful than the presence of reward. Claire resurfaced at a competitor 6 months later. I heard through industry contacts that she was building a new team, establishing her territory. Sometimes I wonder if she's reflecting on what transpired, if she's evolving her approach or simply refining her techniques of quiet destruction. I hope, for those in her orbit, that the lessons were learned. But hope isn't strategy, and patterns rarely change without intervention. The quarterly leadership retreat approaches. This time, my name is first on the planning committee. My presentation is the opening session, not tucked away where it might be accidentally cut due to time constraints. My recommendations will be considered, debated, potentially implemented. Not because I demanded power, but because I demonstrated the value of perspective, especially the perspective of those who have been sidelined but kept watching. The architecture of exclusion taught me the blueprint for inclusion. The strategic undermining showed me exactly where organizational supports needed reinforcement. Their campaign to diminish me revealed precisely how others might be elevated. This isn't poetic justice, it's practical application of hard-won knowledge. Tonight, as I finalize materials for the retreat, I realize I've stopped looking over my shoulder, stopped bracing for the next subtle cut. Not because the world has become safer, but because I've become stronger. Not in the brittle way that shatters under pressure, but in the flexible way that observes pressure and adapts to it. The way that understands that power often disguises itself as weakness, and weakness sometimes conceals unexpected strength. There's a new analyst who reminds me of myself 3 years ago. Bright, dedicated, perhaps too trusting of organizational goodwill. I've noticed her ideas being borrowed without attribution in recent meetings. Yesterday, I interrupted the flow to say, I believe that strategy was originally proposed by Emma in last week's analysis. Emma, would you like to elaborate on your thinking there? The room went briefly silent. Emma looked startled, then composed herself and articulated her approach with growing confidence. It was a small moment, forgettable to most in the room, but I saw recognition dawn in her eyes. Not just gratitude for the acknowledgement, but awareness that someone was paying attention, that the pattern had been noticed, that she wasn't alone in her experience. After the meeting, she approached me tentatively. Thank you for that, she said. I wasn't sure if I should say something. Document everything, I told her quietly. Not with anger, just with clarity. Patterns tell stories data points can't. She nodded, understanding immediately in that way that people who have felt invisible often do. I gave her my card with my direct extension. Not a dramatic gesture of alliance, just a quiet opening of connection. The kind of moment that doesn't change everything at once but changes the trajectory degree by degree. The system isn't perfect. Now, no human system ever is, but it's more transparent, more accountable. Harder to manipulate through whispers and exclusion. I still keep my journal, recording both progress and backsliding with the same detached precision, not out of trauma or hypervigilance, but because systems require maintenance. Because patterns, once established, are easier to maintain than to create anew. They tried to break me quietly, methodically, without fingerprints or evidence. Instead, they taught me the anatomy of organizational silence, its structures, its pressure points, its vulnerable paths. They showed me exactly how systems fail, those without power, and exactly where intervention creates the most meaningful change. I took that knowledge and built something stronger in the space where my career had been dismantled. Not out of vengeance, but out of recognition that what was broken wasn't just my place in the organization. It was the organization itself. What I reclaimed wasn't just my voice, but the integrity of the entire conversation. The empty chair at the conference table. The late-night system lockout. The pearls touched once, twice during a calculated lie. All of it served its purpose in the end, though not the purpose they intended. All of it formed the foundation of something more durable than their campaign of erasure could ever be. There's a certain peace in that knowledge, a quiet vindication that requires no validation beyond the daily reality of systems functioning, as they should. Of work recognized appropriately, of voices heard clearly, of power held accountably. They tried to break me quietly. I rebuilt everything in silence, and that has made all the difference.